All right, so I want to briefly just talk about the Hyksos in context to Egypt, um, because they're mentioned as a single entity, but they were not a single simple entity. Um, it's a Greek word. Egyptians call them Hyksos, meaning rulers of foreign countries, or literally mountainous. Um, and they applied it only to Eastern rulers. What's interesting is that the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, which I've mentioned and I'll mention again later on, an interesting and significant historian for various sets of reasons, um, he translated the word as king shepherds or captive shepherds, and he was wanting to demonstrate that Jews were ancient of antiquity, just like the Egyptians. And he identified the Hyksos with the Hebrews of the Bible. Important, most historians do not believe the Hyksos were Jews. And this kind of leads us to another interesting aspect, which is we can go to ancient historians, whether it's Manetho or we talk about Josephus, and we almost expect that ancient historians, especially when they're identifying their own histories, would be accurate or close to accurate. But people have different reasons to make claims about certain things of their history. Modern Europe, many, such as the Franks, eventually in France wanted to say that they were descendants of ancient Troy. We know historically that's completely made up, but it was something that was integrated into European rulers' identity about their origins. So we always have to be very skeptical and cautious. We don't write it off completely, but we have to kind of see how these things incorporate into political propaganda or maybe just fantasy about origins. Anyways, the Hyksos though were important into Egyptian society. Their chief god was the Egyptian storm god Seth. They ruled in Lower Egypt. Ruled from in Lower Egypt did not rule at all. Sorry, did not rule all of Egypt. Excuse me, I'm tongue-tied. They adopted many Egyptian ways, so this sounds familiar, like some of the things that happened to Mesopotamia, right? So I was talking about how the history of Egypt was different than Mesopotamia, more isolated, but then they did have also some things kind of like Mesopotamia where foreigners come in and yet then adapt some of their own culture as well. They didn't seem to interfere with Egyptian culture beyond the political sphere. And we're going to see other nations kind of do that with Egypt later on. Okay. There was a revolt that eventually ended 100 years of Hyksos rule over Egypt. Okay. And so that's important to just kind of realize that while Egypt was isolated more so than Mesopotamia, it wasn't isolated. And foreign rulers of Egypt are going to end up happening often, while Egyptian society will remain the same for the most part in many ways. We'll see more about that a little bit later. Okay, so then we're moving up into the New Kingdom period. This was a more warlike period and expansionist. They learned things from their foreign invaders and rulers, the Hyksos, and they became an empire that stretched from Nubia and in the south and Syria in the north. And they became a soldier and slave society. In other words, this is the time when they're also dominating what is now Palestine and Israel area. Okay, and there's always this discussion, the biblical story, which later we'll get into how historical it is or is not, about Jews living in Egypt and then leaving into the Promised Land. But I don't think most of us visualize or know that the so-called Promised Land, Canaan / Israel / Judea, Samaria, so on and so forth, that area was actually ruled and dominated by Egypt itself. Okay, so that's something to take note. All right, so I just want to mention Hatshepsut, woman ruler of Egypt, because it's always interesting and important to bring in the fact that women obviously are still major players in history, although men, because of male dominance, do tell the story more from a male perspective. Um, we know things about her in the same way we know other pharaohs, limited, but we have something to work with. She proclaimed herself a king, and she had to dress in men's clothing and even portray herself with a beard to justify her position. So um, she's often referred to as a king and then later as a queen. It does appear, that there was this kind of gender bias that obviously she would have to take on masculine features an identity just to justify her rule. What's really going on there? I don't think we're really going to know, but it's interesting to think about what she must have had been going through, or what issues were taking place due to her gender and the idea that she could rule, but did she have to be portrayed in this male way? It's a kind of bizarre. Or maybe she wanted to. Was she transgender? We don't know. We don't know. Okay. Her stepson, Tutmosis the third, he militarily expanded Egyptian dominance, conquering people such as the Nubians. Under her reign, and after, things get significant to what we think of as Egyptian history. For example, he was the first Egyptian monarch to use the title pharaoh, and pharaoh means great house, and it also describes the royal palace. And so this is also the time that they were becoming a sea power as well. Here she is, with her beard, and so she's, so it's kind of bizarre, right? In her amazing tomb area. So yeah, we could talk a lot about her, but I'm going to now talk about, lastly, for this section, Akhenaten. Okay, so he's very significant, and his wife Nefertiti. Amenhotep had this religious conversion. Was it sincere? Was it political? We'll never know. Was it both? But he didn't stop believing necessarily in other Egyptian gods, but he focused his worship on Aton, and changed his name to Akhenaten, which basically means Aton is pleased. Sometimes you'll see various spellings of this. By the way, there's not a consistent spelling thing on his name. But he basically expelled the temple priests, and he was against traditional Egyptian religion, and he basically becomes a reformer. He becomes what a 19th century sociologist termed henotheist. Henotheism is a term used instead of monotheism, which is that he worships only Aton as the one true God, but he doesn't deny the existence of other gods. We'll see this term useful in terms of Persian religion later on as well, and sometimes even with Hinduism to a lesser degree, and some debate about Christianity, but that's a whole other topic we'll get to later, and I'm sure you'll have lots of thoughts about that. But the idea that you don't deny other divine beings, but you focus on this one. And he became obsessed with this, and it really cost him tremendously in his rule. His religious reform, he is not able to hold on to territories. He loses territories. He declines getting tribute, meaning money back, and he ended up having a lot of revolts. So this religious reform was tricky, and if you look at the way he was doing everything different, even like art, well, I'm going to stop right here, and then I'm going to continue on one last lecture on him, give a little bit more time, and then we go right into the heart of Egyptian religion itself, outside of Akhenaten's reforms.